Well, as you can see, I've been busy cleaning stuff. All the componentry is all cleaned, all ready to go back together. I won't bother showing you the cleaning process now. Basically it's the same as I did for the Retina IB recently. I think that was in video number 2. Just involved scraping all the rubbish off the casting, cleaning that down with CRC Lectra clean, and using that naphtha, cigarette lighter fluid, to get rid of all the old grease and dust and dirt inside here. Same in the back of the camera, get all the dust out there, get rid of all the film chips that were stuck in the grease at that point. So there's our camera body, and I can start reassembling this stuff. So it's just a case of getting the parts lined up so the process will go relatively smoothly. Alright, I'll start with the lens standard. This is the trigger or the finger that activates the shutter release lever on the shutter itself. Two screws. The smaller of the two screw heads, that's the screw that goes at the bottom. Check that that moves smoothly, tighten up the screws, they don't need much. There's a return spring for that. The return spring's here on that screw. It'll be entertaining getting this started. Without dislodging the spring. I'll get that spring hooked into position and tighten that screw up. So there's our spring-loaded shutter release. Now you normally lubricate this with a bit of graphite powder. Graphite powder has the advantage that it's never going to get sticky and it's not going to attract dust. Alright, so normally I just take a little bit of graphite powder, drop it into the slot here and here, tilt this up, work that lever repeatedly. Make sure it's all worked in, and just use my rocket blower, blow that out, and that part's done. Now to assemble this into the shroud, that piece, first I'm taking some synthetic grease, running around through there where the buttons go. Take the buttons, and their return springs, and the return springs go into the hole in the button. They do not go over the pin. Take the button and pin, fit that into position at the top, keep that depressed with my finger, take the other button and fit that at the bottom, depress that with thumb and finger, take the shroud, slide this into place, those buttons should just pop out into position. And then this can be lubricated with some synthetic grease. So, on the rail, top and bottom, slide that down, and on the inside, right in the middle, that's where the button is going to slide. Pull that into position, check that it slides smoothly. That part's done. Next I want to fit the sleeve into place. This is the sleeve. So I'm holding this depressed with my finger, slide the sleeve in underneath, fold the front back into there. The sleeve's trapped now, it won't fall out by itself. That's safe to handle. Next we want to put this back into the casting. This is the shaft, the transfer shaft if you like, which couples with the cocking rack and takes the action of the film advance through to the shutter to cock the shutter. So I'm just applying a bit of synthetic grease there. That drops back into its spot in the casting there. That's held in place with this little L-shaped bracket. I'll drop that on. Holding that with my finger from underneath, I'll line up the hole in the top. Take this fixing screw, which is the small rounded head screw, and just do that up lightly. Now, one of the things this bracket achieves is it controls how much movement backwards or forwards there is of that gear, that little pinion on the shaft. There needs to be some clearance there. If there's too much clearance, if the bracket's too far forward and there's too much slop, what will happen is that the shutter cocking rack will only be making contact with part of the width of the teeth, and as a result they will tend to fail early because they're getting overstressed. So what I do is take my shutter cocking rack, drop that in from the top. Now I take a feeler gauge. In this case it's 4/1000ths of an inch, which is roughly 0.1 millimetre. Slide that in there, loosen the screw, push it back as far as it'll go, tighten the screw and check that I've got smooth movement there. That's good, that's all looking very good indeed. So that means that that bracket is correctly placed, the screws holding that in the right place, and as a result we can put this back into the camera body. Now you need to make sure that this shaft comes up through the hole easily, and it may take a bit of a wriggle to get this seated, but it just should seat back into the casting. And this is held in place in the casting with 4 screws. And we've got 4 screws here. 2 of them are pretty dirty. That's a little bit of corrosion or adhesive on there. 2 of them are nice and clean. And these the clean ones could go at the top. That one's a little bit rough looking around the edges, but it'll work. Make sure these holes are lined up. Now a word of caution here, when you're doing these screws up, don't press down on the screwdriver. All you'll do is dislodge the little threaded bushes that are in the shroud, and then you'll have to fish them back into place, which is always a nuisance. Do the screws up lightly, let them pick up the thread by themselves. That's not lined up. This screw in this position is the one most likely to cause you grief, because there's not much meat in the shroud holding the bush in at that point. As a result, it hasn't got much tension on it and it's easily dislodged. these two screws, as you can see, are a bit discoloured. That's from corrosion, and probably a bit of adhesive as well. Right, so my 4 screws are all in place. I can tighten those screws up. That's all good. Now don't exercise this by pulling this out all the way to the front, because you can be sure the shroud will take the opportunity to jump out if you do that. Leave it just as it is. The focus mount can slide back into the body now. This is all clean and ready to go. It's got a little notch in that top edge there, which lines up with the hole through the front standard. And this is held in with a series of screws. Nickel plated round head screw. This holds the focus mount to the front standard. They're all at 90 degrees from each other, these screws. The screw head there looks a little bit worn. But I think this camera had been apart before. Someone's probably been in this deep. Let's run these screws in. Run all 4 screws into place before you tighten them. That's that. Now I haven't extended the front of this at all. I don't want to lose the position of that sleeve, and I don't want it to drop into the body. Okay, so the rest of the focus mount can go in here now. So we have the inner and outer helical. Now we've got our scribed lines on here, so I know where things go back. They're a bit hard to see now, this has been through the cleaner, but I can see 2 lines here, 1 line directly opposite over here, and likewise there are some on the front here. 2 lines here and 1 opposite. So it's only about 16 different positions you can get this in. So start and see where it ends up, and these lines should line up when the front surfaces are dead level with each other. So I'm looking to see where mine are, and I can see that my double line on the inner is here and on the outer is here, so I need to come around in this direction a couple of clicks, I'd say. Here's 2 clicks. Let's go back and see where I am now. Where's my 2 lines? There they are on the inner, and there they are on the outer. And I need to come back another click, I think. Sometimes you'll go around in circles a few times before you'll get this right. That's quite normal. Try another one. Oh. I think I'm going to skip it. Yeah, it's not square. I'm not picking up the thread. Let's try it there. No, I've well overshot there, I think. Where are my marks? Yeah, miles away. Should be over here. Sometimes you'll find that it's easier to get it started from one face than the other face. Well, that one just fell in. But you can't always easily achieve that. Well, nearly there. Now I've overshot the other way. That's it. So I've got my two lines, the ones that ran through an angle down at the bottom here, and the one line, the one that ran through straight across up there. And the front faces of these are nice and level. So these pieces are in the correct arrangement relative to each other. This now just needs to be lubricated with some helical grease and popped into the mount. Well, here's the grease. Helimax XP optical and instrument helicoid grease. This works well for me. It's quite light. It looks like some sort of magic face cream. Now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to back that thread out most of the way, but not all the way. Take a bit of helicoid grease, put a stripe across the thread. Do this in 5 or 6 places around the circumference. That's a bit much. And then just screw that in and work it backwards and forwards. See how it feels. If there's an awful lot of drag, one of two things is happening. Either you've got far too much grease in there, or the threads weren't clean to start off with. That feels good to me. So I'm going to take some more, run it around the outside. Where it's going to run in the mount. And there are 2 posts visible in there. That's where the inner slides forward and backwards. That's these ones here, the ones with the little holes in them. So I just run a little bit of grease in there. And on the opposite side, and you don't need an awful lot. And then taking this and taking note of which way up is which. This is the bottom with the 2 scribe marks, so I know it goes that way up. This being the top of the, no, that's the wrong way around. That being the top of the camera. That should drop into place on the rails. And all going well, that should move smoothly in the mount. Don't rack it all the way out, otherwise you're going to have to lift that off again and put it back in place. So that's fine. Now that just needs its retainer plate in place. The front retaining plate will have 4 areas opposite. There's screw holes where you can see there's been some considerable friction because the black finish is worn away. So make sure that gets a little bit of grease. This is just the helical grease because that's what's handy at the moment. You could use something else. There's a notch in here which helps you line that up with where it goes. And this is held in place with 4 small flathead or countersunk head screws. As always, run all 4 screws in before you tighten them up. All 4 screws are started. Go around and tighten those up. I'll just check that the focus still moves freely. See, that's moving nicely. We've got 4 black screws, long black screws. They drop through in these positions towards the corners on the outside, and they will couple the bellows to the back of the front standard. Now when you pull these up tight, you're pulling up tight with a layer of leather and cloth in between the plate on the insides of the bellows and the back of the front standard, so they do not pull up tight like metal to metal surfaces. So don't overdo it. They're not going to come to a noticeable stop. They're going to come to a point where they feel fairly firm, and you can just give them a wee snug further than that, but don't go mad. Okay, checking my focus again. That's all moving freely. That can have the focus scale ring on there next. Now we can put the focus scale ring in place. I'm putting the shutter release shaft through here to stop that sleeve from being able to escape. Means I can extend the front all the way out. The sleeve's not going to fall out. Here's my focus scale ring, and this needs to be lined up with the scribe marks we put in here previously. I'm just checking this because you've got lines top and bottom, 2 lines at the bottom in this case. It's not hard to work out where the best compromise position will be. And I say compromise because doubtless something moved and it won't look perfect. Now I have 6 screws here. 4 of them are all one size and 2 are slightly smaller. The larger screws go in here, and the 2 smaller screws will hold the plate on the front on the inner helical. Don't do all the screws up tight until they're all in place. You may need to make slight adjustments to your focus scale ring relative to the outer helical, because sometimes when you're doing up the screws it will shift slightly. Be aware that that might happen. I'm not saying it will happen, but it might happen. So if you run your screws down and then check to see your alignment marks are still where you left them, and if all is good, snip those 4 screws up. Now do not over tighten those screws. If you over tighten those screws, all you'll do is distort the outer helical and it won't move smoothly. So that's that part. Now we have this piece. This is our front plate, and the tab goes inwards. I'll drop that in place on the inner helical, and 2 screws hold that in place. These were the smaller of those screws. This piece also acts to limit the travel of this helical, so it has a firm stop at the infinity position. Let's get those screws in place. Just nip that up tight. They're quite small, those screws, don't go mad. Okay, so now we have a firm stop at the infinity position. That's all looking good. Okay, the gear and the shroud can go on the front there in its chrome shroud. Now the gear couples up with the shaft came through from the back of the camera. So normally apply a bit of synthetic grease to the centre, some to the outside where it's running through the casting here, and just a little wipe on that front surface where it's sitting in the chrome shroud. Now this should fit over that shaft. Sometimes the shaft's wobbled about. You might need to line it up. See if that'll drop on for us. Yeah, that's coupled up. And if I turn it at the front here, you might see the gear turning in the back. Well, I can see it, but I doubt you can. You have to take my word for it. Here's the chrome shroud that goes over the front. Drop that down into position. And that's held on with 2 chrome plated brass screws. I'll run 1 screw in. Lightly. Get its mate in place. Take care doing this, because otherwise if you drop that screw you can be sure it'll fall somewhere where it's going to be awkward to get it back. Okay, so that's in. Now normally what I do with this, I keep some pressure to the outside on that shroud and gear as I'm putting this in place and snug the screws up. That's because a little bit of backlash in the gear at this position causes absolutely no harm at all, but it means that the shroud will not be scuffing on the focus scale ring here. So check that the focus scale ring does in fact move smoothly, that the shroud is not rubbing on it. And that's good. I can collapse the front. That's that little bit done. All good so far, but we are living dangerously, so I want to fit the rewind next, for a very important reason. So I'm applying a bit of synthetic grease to the bush, fit the shaft in place. The inner shaft, I need to apply some synthetic grease to that. Don't need to go mad. This only goes in one way, it's keyed. Slide that in from the bottom, press it in, make sure it runs all the way through and you're good to go. Now we'll fit that to the body. Put the rewind in place on the camera body. 2 screws, one of these is a replacement because the camera as it originally arrived had an odd screw in that position, and I do like things to be original, or at least look like they're original. Do those 2 screws up. Now with that in place, we can put a rubber band across from the rewind to the shutter release here, which means the shutter release can't fall out of the body, and that means that the sleeve won't fall into the hole and cause us enormous amounts of grief. Doesn't need much tension, it's just to stop that getting away while we're working on other things. That's all that needs to be done. You don't want it over strong, you just end up bending something.